Hi, good evening. Okay, I have a lot of interesting thoughts about Freyr's book, as well as the presentation of Roberto Lugo. Um, Both of these things really resonated with me because of where I teach. And in the summertime, I spent a lot of time researching culturally relevant and culturally sustaining pedagogies because of my demographic of students. So, Roberto Lugo, especially, um, I want to introduce him to my kids and see if we can't do some performance art um, that resonates or resembles what he's talking about. So, what I liked that overlapped between Lugo and Frere was this idea of having a conversation and a dialogue about change and about opposing sides. The second chapter, specifically about the second talk that he did, cultural action and contextualization, I found really, really fascinating about how you go about change. And when you go about change in an extreme way, it just replaces the measures you already have and puts similar utilitarian or dictatorial kind of ideas on top of the people again. So the thing that I appreciated the most, and I wrote by it like ideal classroom, it says revolutionary utopia tends to be dynamic rather than static. It tends to life rather than death, and to love as liberation, um, to living together in harmony, to emotion, to dialogue, to who organize themselves reflectively for action, to creative and communicative language, to reflecting challenges, and to values that are lived rather than myths that are imposed. So, with those two things being said, that of Roberto Lugo and his idea of taking who he is as a person and combining it with other things to make a piece of art that has two opposing ideas. So when you have that, and then you flower it with this idea um, of Freire and his revolutionary utopia, I definitely think that it feeds into my idea of what a good classroom environment looks like and how I purport a change not only for students to understand cultural ideas in regard to art, but their own identities in regard to art. Um, on Friday night at the football game, we had a homecoming football game. There, in the news, it said there was gang violence on campus and shots were fired and 8 people were taken into custody at Granger High. Upon further what's the word? I just lost it. Investigation of this event. It was other gangs from other parts of Utah that came and chose to have a fight on our campus. The reason why I find this appropriate here is that my students tend to get put in boxes and they get this single story idea, and I think that Freire really talks about that in his first chapter too, about education and about how we learn and create and teach culture. And so I want the idea in my classroom for my students to understand that we cannot always control the single story that is placed upon us. But we can artistically create and cultivate a culture of change that represents a whole story of a human being, and that purports students to change instead of feeling stuck in the boxes that are given sometimes or boxes chosen. Um, it depends, but I just found that's been really heavy on my heart, I guess, as I'm reading, to see all of the media about Granger High and all the gang violence that's going on. And yes, there are gangs, but there are also beautiful things. And so I think this idea of helping my students get out of that and see past that, much like Roberto Lugo did with his brother in jail, who's assisting him with his art, and kind of understanding that cultural empowerment includes embracing all of those things, and finding artistic ways to explain the beauty and the pain that is having a dialogue with those that label you as your story. So overall, that's kind of my idea of introducing Lugo and Frere into my classroom is having more activities and dialogue that centers around this idea of cultural action as change and what it means to my students and how they can embody that in their own creative beings. So those were my thoughts and ramblings on this week's reading. I'm loving how each week is different, and I'm really getting a lot out of it for my classroom. So thank you again, and have a good night.